Cool, so we're going to go ahead and get started again. So if you would take your seats and let's close the back doors, please. So our next speaker, we actually have two speakers for the WayPaver Foundation. They sponsored the lunch that we just had. WayPaver is dedicated to pushing humanity forward and outward toward the final frontier. By removing roadblocks to lunar settlement, WayPaver is paving the way to humankind's future in space. WayPaver will have their CEO, Nick Arnott, speak, and then following that, their COO, Patrick Gray, will speak, and there will not be any questions. If you have questions for them, you can find them in the lobby during the networking break, and I'm sure they would be happy to answer any questions you guys have. So let's give a warm welcome to Nick Arnott.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks to the entire team at Space Frontier Foundation. This has been an awesome week, and we really had a blast sponsoring lunch. Thanks to all of you who allowed us to put you to work during lunch and coming up with new granting programs. But I really want to use this time during this talk as more of an introduction, because we're kind of the new kid on the block around here, as some of you have found out. As I mentioned during lunch, we haven't even actually officially launched yet. That'll be coming up on July 20th. But we, of course, wanted to take the opportunity to give all of you here at NewSpace 2016 a bit of a sneak peek into what we're up to. So if I can get the clicker to work here. There we go. So as I mentioned, WayPaver is a relatively new organization. We just got started within the past year here with a seed grant from a group of donors down in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And as we were getting off the ground, the mission that we set off with was forming as a foundation that's supporting science and technology development in furtherance of lunar settlement. And the question that we kept asking ourselves and kept grappling with was, okay, how do we help enable or establish a lunar settlement, a permanent, sustained human presence on the lunar surface without a mission budget of billions of dollars secured up front? How do we get started today? And the conclusion that we arrived at after many months of deliberating, of soliciting as much feedback as we could possibly get, the conclusion that we arrived at was, well, let's reverse engineer the problem. Instead of looking at lunar settlement as this massive challenge set in front of us that we have to knock out in one fell swoop, let's look at all of the different aspects of that, all of the different feeder problems and symptoms that make up that larger challenge. And as a foundation, devise really creative ways that we can distribute our resources so that we can begin pushing the needle on lunar settlement today, get started right away, and begin seeing value right off the bat from square one. So before I talk a little bit more about what all of that entails and what structure we actually ended up adopting, I'm not going to harp on this slide too much. Most of us are already familiar with the arguments for why the moon, but it's a question we get quite a bit. The two that I always like to point out when I have the chance to is that its close proximity is a big plus for the moon. There's no waiting months on end for a launch window. It's nearly always accessible, and due to the proximity, robotic operations and communications are in near real time, and it has resources we know we can use. We know that there's anywhere from hundreds of millions to billions of tons of water on the moon, most of those locked in the cold traps of the poles of the moon. Obviously, water is the most valuable resource in space right now, and we know that there are other resources on the lunar surface that we can use as a human footprint expands on the lunar surface. But to go back to how we work, we decided to adopt this method that we call research-guided grant making. And it's really quite simple, and we're really excited about how it's playing out so far. But what that means is that we start by taking a big challenge, as I mentioned before, so in this case, lunar settlement, and breaking that down into all the different components. So what are the smaller challenges that make up this big challenge that we can begin pushing the needle on right away? And as we identify those challenges, we catalog them in something that we call the Lunar Settlement Index, which my colleague Patrick is going to be describing a little bit more in depth. But along the way, as we're cataloging these different roadblocks, these different hurdles that make up lunar settlement, we're also working to identify people, entrepreneurs, researchers, scientists, companies, startups who are working on potential solutions to mitigate those roadblocks to lunar settlement. Excuse me. And a lot of these people that we've begun to identify already, some of them don't even realize the space applications of their work. There's some people who are doing fantastic work in the energy sector and life sciences that have never considered the application of the work that they're producing, the advancements that they're making to something like lunar settlement. So those are the people that we're trying to draw in as much as we can. And as all of this kind of comes into focus, and as the Lunar Settlement Index is assembled, the really cool thing about it is that it starts to create kind of a heat map. It shows us where the most critical roadblock areas, what are the most critical categories preventing lunar settlement from becoming a reality today, and also shows us within those category areas where are the specific topics, who are the specific companies that aren't receiving the support and the funding that they need. So the beauty of this is that altogether that really informs the grant-making processes of WayPaver itself. And the benefits that come from this are, in my opinion, pretty well summarized in these 3 points right here. We don't need billions of dollars to get started. When we first got started, we said, okay, how are we ever going to leverage $15, $20 billion? And we realized, well, we don't need that. With really creative and really well-designed grant programs, we can leverage quite a bit of outside support. So we can get started much sooner. We can get started on day one. Secondly, we can, in the early days, direct funding specifically to companies, individuals, to researchers that are working on advancements that have dual applicability. So they're also benefiting life here on Earth, hopefully for millions and billions of people, but also pushing the needle by producing very critical advancements that help enable lunar settlement in the long run. And the third point, in worst case scenario, say a lunar settlement or a lunar outpost never materializes in humanity's future, which I refuse to entertain the idea of. But worst case scenario, value is still produced by making these incremental advancements, by making these incremental investments in very critical technologies, especially ones that have dual application both to quality of life here on Earth and also to lunar settlement. There's still value that is derived from that process. So as I mentioned, I'm not going to say too much here. Well, I'm going too far ahead. That's not my slide. As I mentioned, we are officially launching on July 20th. And I believe that announcement, which we're pretty excited about, will be live streamed. So we hope a lot of you tune into that. I believe it'll be live streamed on our Facebook page. But in the meantime, I'm going to invite my colleague Patrick up here to tell you a little bit more about how it works and what the Lunar Settlement Index is.
All right, can everybody hear me? Fantastic. So that great overview, I want to talk a little bit about the specifics of the research we're doing and why we even decided to do it in this way. So many times over the last 20 to 40 years, brilliant folks have gotten together, they've discussed the path we need to take to get to the moon, they've published papers, and they said, okay, we figured it out, and then it went nowhere. So we were trying to reconsider that. How can we actually be effective, right? Without $20 billion, how can we actually go about making an impact? And especially the idea of providing consistency over the long term. So what we really wanted to do there was look at, exactly as Nick said, look at the really big picture and look at how we can break it up. And once we have an idea of what those specific roadblocks are that are preventing us from living on the moon today, use the web of knowledge around there, which I'm going to dive into, to effectively deploy resources to actually solve those roadblocks. What that led to is what we're calling the Lunar Settlement Index, or the LSI. And so to give a little more specifics to that structure, what it looks like, what we've done is come up with the leanest set of roadblocks that once we solve, lunar settlement is easily achieved. And really what we want there is the fewest number of dominoes that we can push over such that the whole set falls down. And now once we know what those dominoes are, we can start to look at what are possible solutions. You know, what solutions do other industries have that we can rope in that may be effective in solving these? What solutions are basically already there? And then which ones truly need resources and aren't even close to being solved? which is where we might fit in. And the next sort of step down in this data structure is who's actually working on those solutions. That's critical if you actually want to make them happen. Who are the brightest minds currently in that space? And once you know who's working on them, how can they best be supported? How can we and the community at large focus our energy such that those people get the work done that ends up solving the big picture, and we get to live on the moon. Okay, so with that abstract sort of idea of what this data looks like, roadblocks, possible solutions, current players, and then how to help those players, let's look at a few specifics. So a lot of these you guys are familiar with. How can we make sure that humans can survive long-term in 1.6G on lunar gravity? That's a bear for sure. How can we store energy through the lunar night, 14 days without solar power? Or how can we make it so we have an alternative to solar power? Right now there are ways to throw enough money to get to lunar orbit. We don't really have many solutions for getting from lunar orbit to the lunar surface or below. Major problems. What's the ideal habitat structure for long-term human settlement? Where is that? What part of the moon? What surface below? Where should that be? So and our team has sort of researched into what the major list of these is that we have to solve to be able to get there. So how can we use this? Okay, so you got the big picture. We sort of know what the data structure looks like. Sort of know what the roadblocks that we're attempting to solve look like. And part of our core philosophy there is that they are all solvable, right? They are solutions to these issues. And so what we really need to do on the WayPaver side and on the community side is find out which of those we can support and then which of them are most viable. So how's WayPaver going to use the LSI? Well, we're going to use it to find out which of those current players to give our resources to, and then we want the community to be in it as large. There's so many folks that are brilliant, so many folks that are excited about this, that don't know the best direction to plug in. So if we can show everyone in it from PhD students to researchers, engineers, what they should be working on. Let's say you destroyed your PhD and you want to plug in, well, come to us. We're going to find the intersection of possible funding sources, the most effective thing to work on, and we go from there, right? Bringing more folks into the fold. And I think the next component is that we know that some of these have ROI, they have money-making potential. So bringing in VC firms, bringing in angel investors, that there is options for those, right? And then the third component there is there's a lot of really exciting scientific philanthropy that is not being approached by the space industry. You think about the solutions to recycling water on the moon, the implications that has for parched countries, for desert countries. You think about self-printing solar panels and how much that could help countries that are off the grid, impoverished communities. So that's the immediate use, right? Let's think about the long term. Where do we want to actually be with this over the years? Besides just knocking out a couple, we want to actually be paving the way consistently for a lunar settlement to exist. Right, the goal is that in 5 years, let's say we've knocked out 5 of the 20 most critical roadblocks as a community. And then we know what resources, what mechanism of funding was most effective to help those people. We've got metrics around what groups worked the best. And between that consistency, the stewardship through the community of what that looks like over the long term, our goal is to make it so that a lunar settlement is inevitable. And how can you be a part? We love the idea that so much of this information is applicable to everyone in this room. And so actually today, for the first time, we're publicly opening a way for you guys to be a part of this. So it's lsindex.org for Lunar Settlement Index. And basically you can go on here if you know people working on these solutions. If you are one of the people working on these solutions, we want you to plug into the community. We want to know exactly what you're working on. And that's the first step to us helping support you. Thank you very much.
You would take your seats, and let's close the back doors, please. So our next speaker, we actually have 2 speakers for the WayPaver Foundation. They sponsored the lunch that we just had. WayPaver is dedicated to pushing humanity forward and outward toward the final frontier. By removing roadblocks to lunar settlement, WayPaver is paving the way to humankind's future in space. WayPaver will have their CEO, Nick Arnott, speak, and then following that, their COO, Patrick Gray, will speak, and there will not be any questions. If you have questions for them, you can find them in the lobby during the networking break, and I'm sure they would be happy to answer any questions you guys have. So let's give a warm welcome to Nick Arnott.
Thank you, Andrew. And thanks to the entire team at Space Frontier Foundation. This has been an awesome week. And we really had a blast sponsoring lunch. Thanks to all of you who allowed us to put you to work during lunch and coming up with new granting programs. But I really want to use this.
Cool, so we're going to go ahead and get started again. So if you